and make sure there is no background. Let's minimize background noise so that we can listen well. But meanwhile, okay, let me see if I can mute all of us so that when it is time to a question, we can raise our hand and ask questions. So, sir, you can mute yourself and take the floor.
Right. Thank you very much, leader, and good evening to every one of us. I want to believe we've had a wonderful weekend thus far. And from the last time we had research up to this time, I want to believe there's so much more we would have learned uh, about research, and I'm believing that there will be so much more we'll learn today as well. First of all, I'm going to apologize. My voice will be a bit cracky, and you will see me trying to augment, trying to, or you hear me trying to clear my throat because I had some little cold in the last 2 days because of the rains and the rest, and it's a bit affecting me. So please, you bear with me to an extent. All right. So by way of recap, first class we try to understand um, what research is. We looked at concept of research. We looked at the various activities that ensue when a researcher is conducting a research. We also looked at uh, we introduced the various forms of research which we would look at, basically categorized into three: the qualitative, the quantitative, and the mixed method research. But if I would take us a bit backward, we said research is the process of um, developing knowledge on what little or nothing is known about. And need I mention that research is done through certain procedures and processes. It is essential that we understand what each of these processes are, what procedures there is to be adopted in conducting a research. We also reminded us that what problem we are researching about would determine what type of research it is we are doing, or some of the categories of activities that the researcher is expected to indulge in while carrying out the research. The methodology that is applicable to a research is also determined by the research problem that is to be studied. I said, for instance, somebody who is studying a concept or a problem relating to poverty, uh, if the geographical location or your study area would also determine what the form of instrument to use to measure poverty. And if you remember quite well, we did a cross-sectional form of analysis when we talked about Somalia and Nigeria, providing that these two societies can be measured differently when it comes to poverty evaluation because of the nature of the society on both extremes. And we say what you use to measure poverty in Nigeria might not be effective in measuring poverty in Somalia. What you use in Somalia might not be effective in Nigeria. So we will have to understand that each peculiar problem, our study location, um, and other categories determine what form of methodology, what form of instrument that can be used in the process of studying the problem. Okay, so we'll move on to say today we want to look at the forms of research as we identify. But again, before we do, before we go into these forms of research, I want to do a relative breakdown for us and to tell us that, excuse me, to tell us that in research and in academic research, the one we will be engaging in soon, there are five major components. Five major components. There are five major components that makes up the academic research, the dissertations and thesis you'll be writing. Now, I want to, before we talk about the quantitative or the various categories of research types, I want to give a breakdown of what these five components of your dissertations and thesis are about. This will help us when we begin to talk about these three major categories of research. Now, the first chapter of your dissertation or thesis is usually titled the introduction. A lot of people have the problem or challenge of understanding what a problem is about. And this is where the technicalities of a research is about. Now, there are people who do not understand the problem they want to engage in. We find out that people just set up to go into research without knowing critically what this or what the problem is about. Now, when you do not understand critically what the problem of research is, it will be difficult for the individual to give an introduction that encapsulates first your background to the study. Your background to the study provides an explanation to the issues surrounding the problem you want to study, giving insight to the problem or to that thing that the individual want to study. Now, until we have adequate understanding, we might not be able to provide this background information. Take, for instance, somebody wants to study insecurity, or let's say precisely terrorism, and you are looking at the socioeconomic factor or socioeconomic factors that influence terrorist activities in Nigeria. First, you must understand what you mean when you say terrorism. You must understand the various issues that have ensued in Nigeria relating to terrorism. It is only on that basis that you can provide a background understanding to say, for instance, since 2009, Nigeria had grappled with the problem of terrorist activities since the challenge of the Nigerian police and the now the, the past leader of the Islamic sect in the person of Muhammad Yusuf. Now remember that that sect had its own doctrine and was operating like other religious groups in the country. It became a terrorist group after Abubakar Shekau took over the leadership of that group with the intention to avenge the death of its leader in the hands of the Nigerian police. Now, an individual who do not understand some of these historical factors and the things that have been happening in terms of the three states in Northeast that were initially completely held down by terrorism before it spread across the entire Northeast and gradually to the entire North and North Central. It will be difficult for that person to develop a background understanding. And so it will be difficult for the individual to even know what form of research is engaging in, whether it will be a qualitative, a quantitative, or a mixed method. Because in the long run, what determines whether your work or your research would be categorized under qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method would depend largely on the form of data you will collect. Now, if you don't have an understanding of what terrorism is, you might not understand what form of data you are going to collect. How many of us know that we can do what is called content analysis to generate data? Now, where is content analysis categorized? Is it a qualitative form? Is it a quantitative form? Or a mixed method form? Now, again, one of the major requirements of our methodology, as far as the Department of Sociology is concerned, is that in your dissertation or thesis, one of these forms is not allowed. You must apply true or straight up what is now acceptable is a mixed method research. This is because a single research instrument is no longer, or a single method of carrying out your study is no longer acceptable. An individual is expected to apply two forms of instrument. Most time, these two forms of instrument will now take you into gathering both qualitative and quantitative data. So, in most occasions today, our researches, both dissertation, thesis, and if you go into the wider society carnal research, most researches now come with having both qualitative and quantitative data. That is why the third major form or component or category was developed, which is the mixed method research. So you see that having an understanding of your background or the problem you want to study would now tell you which of these categories you are engaging in. So after your background, it is essential that you distinctively pick out the points that are actually the problem that the research wants to uncover, the things that the research wants to go into, the problems that the research or the gaps that have been existing that this research is going to bridge. A lot of people don't know that your problem in specific is what is discussed under the statement of problem, still in the introductory part, still under your chapter one, as you call it. Now, if you have your problems well articulated, it will be easy for you to be able to develop your research questions that would be developed from the statement of problems you have outlined. If you have three peculiar problems, it means obviously your research questions will be three because they will be questions that would query those problems you have stated on your statement of problem. I hope we are understanding this bit by bit development of knowledge on this course. Like I said in the first class, I'm not just teaching you research to pass your exams. We'll be teaching you this course so that you will have the requisite skill and understanding for undertaking a research. That is what postgraduate school is about. So when your research questions, of course, have been raised, it is only when you have an adequate understanding that you can simplify these things to the point of raising specific questions. And of course, these questions becomes your aim and your objective. All right. So that aside, other components of your introduction will be the scope of study, the significance of study, and sometimes the definition of terms if necessary. But then the second aspect, which is a major challenging aspect for students, is the second part of the research work. This second part is titled um, is titled Literature Review and Theoretical Framework. Literature Review and Theoretical Framework. Now, it is essential for us to know that through literature, through literatures, we will be able to address some of the problems that our research has been able to raise. Now, most students go out of context when they review literature. It is one of the bane of academic researchers. And this is one of the aspects that your gerontology class has been taught by Dr. Oscar is also helping you to address. Now, in your literature review, being an academic research, you are expected to depend largely on scholarly works, scholarly ideas, scholarly perceptions to an issue. There's almost nothing on earth that had not been studied. There are views, there are positions that scholars have taken. You are expected to review these different positions to an issue while also providing your own understanding in terms of picking out the limitations of these works you are reviewing. Now, while doing this, one thing that is germane is your citation and references. In citing, currently there is the seventh edition of APA format type of referencing, which largely determine, excuse me, your form of citation. Now we have two categories of citation. We have narrative and we have parenthetical citation. I will deal with this much later, but just to give you an idea that the embodiment of a research work is your literature review. It is in this area that one of the major concerns of our scholarly capacity is required. After reviewing different works regarding an issue or a problem, it is expected that you also review different theories that are applicable to this or to the problem and selecting one that will guide the research process. Now, students again forget that in the process of data analysis, it is often required that emphasis will be laid on the theory that was adopted in chapter 2 while you are discussing and analyzing the data you have got in your chapter 4. So, research is such a technical process that beyond the academic form of research or thesis or dissertation, actual research follows this same pattern. Now, after your chapter 2, the third aspect is your methodology. And this is the major area that connects to the forms of research that we were supposed to talk about tonight: qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method. Once you understand which of these forms you are going to be engaging in, it will be easy for you to develop your methodology. This is where I'm headed. Students, most time, miss the link. Their methodology are oftentimes woeful because they do not even understand whether they are engaging in a qualitative, a quantitative, or a mixed method research. And that is why I also took time to explain those classifications of research process in terms of experimental research, evaluative research, descriptive research, and so on and so forth, explanatory research. If you have not well defined whether you are going to be doing a descriptive research, how would you know the form of data you will collect, which would determine whether it's a qualitative, a quantitative, or a mixed method research? So I'm going to ask a question right away, and I'm going to want to take three responses very, very quickly. I'm going to read out a topic, and I want the class, three people, to tell me which of the classifications that we did in terms of experimental, evaluative, descriptive, explanatory forms or categories will this topic fall in. If I come up with a research topic to say an or analysis of the effect of social media on electoral outcome in Nigeria, or analysis of the effect of social media on electoral outcome of the 2019 presidential election. I take that again. Analysis of the effect of social media on electoral outcome of the 2019 presidential election in Nigeria. Please, class rep, unmute the class so we'll get three responses. What categories or what would the researcher be doing? Would he be evaluating? Would he be explaining? Would he be describing? Would the researcher be experimenting? And
Okay.
very,
I
very
think
good.
hands are up, but
So
why
we need
why
three
I
responses.
three response? I think the analysis, there are two because of the variable, because of the two variables involved in your questions. Experimental can fly, and also descriptive method can fly because the social media, the mass media, and the election and the electoral what are the two variables, one dependent and one independent. So, and we learned that when we have variables, we can use perimeter and also the descriptive. But okay, that is my own contribution. Then let me check out the hands are up. Only one hands up. Adapa, unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay, good evening, sirs.
Good
Good
evening.
evening, sir.
Good evening.
Okay, to me, I think if you're analyzing the effect of social medias on electoral outcome, I think that is your evaluative. Did you get me?
Yeah, I got you.
It's evaluative because
Okay, why is it evaluative?
we're trying to evaluate the effect it will have on electoral outcome.
Okay, that's Alapan's view. And
That's my
Mr.
view.
Paul said, yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Paul said experimental because of the variables we have, social media and electoral outcome. That's also his view, and they are both of you have spoken well. Can we get two more responses? Okay, can we get Salau Babatunde Said?
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I think is what's it called? Exploratory method, in the sense that
Exploratory.
yes, am I right?
No, proceed. Tell us why.
Because if you look at the method, he answered the question of what, why, and how. And if you are talking about the effects of social media, that means you want to know how and why it affects the presidential election in 2019. So I think for me, I don't know if I'm right or I'm wrong, but I think for me it's exploratory method that I think we can apply.
Okay. Can we take the last hand? Let's take one more person. Caleb Lazarus. Please go ahead.
Caleb, unmute yourself.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm from my own point of view, I think it's evaluative because this thing has already happened, and we are trying to look into why and what into the what of what the effects of that social media on it. So I stand with evaluative.
All right. Thank you very, very much. It's good to get feedback. Thank you, class. I've all spoken well. You have all tried, but I think there's still a gap of understanding somewhere. Now, let's go back to Mr. Paul's response of experimental. He made a valid point when he said there are two variables. Yes, the two variables, of course, are social media and electoral outcome. But you see, if you choose to experiment while you are doing that research, you have expanded the scope of it, which will, let me say, experimental research in that regard can fly. But it means that you would have to relatively, while developing your hypothesis, you'll be recoining the research focus, in that you'll be asking a question of whether there is a relationship between social media and electoral outcome. But remember, the topic specifically said the effect of social media. And we're not looking at whether social media affects or not. We're looking at the fact that yes, it affects. It means it has been established. So what are those effects of social media on electoral outcome? Now, I've said experimental can fly only when you begin to develop your hypothesis and recoining the focus in terms of making it a balanced argument where you raise two. I said again, where you raise two questions, whether there is a relationship between those variables or whether there is not. So it means you'll be raising both a null and an alternate hypothesis. Now, the other respondent said evaluation. Mr. Alapa said we are evaluating, and Caleb Lazarus also said we are evaluating. And Caleb said we are evaluating because it has been done. If you go back to the note, to those who were part of the class the first time, I said something about evaluative research. I said evaluative research is, in evaluative research, a researcher is or would be engaging in finding the effectiveness, the efficiency, or otherwise of policies and institutions. Now, because social media and electoral outcome are neither policies nor institutions, evaluation can't fly. Evaluation cannot fly. Because in social media, it is not a policy. Social media is not an institution. Electoral outcome is a process. It is not an institution, and it is also not a policy. Remember, I'll take that again. Evaluation is finding the effectiveness, the efficiency, or otherwise. Now, the fourth person said explorative. Explorative is engaging in a process of research to develop knowledge on what little or nothing is known about. We all know that social media had a big role in the 2015 and subsequently 2019 general elections in Nigeria. But what are the specific effects of social media? It means that this research entails an explanatory research. If you go back to your note again, I told you that explanatory research does cause and effect of a phenomenon on society. Why something is existing and what the effect it has. Social media is a growing phenomenon. It has effect on the situation of the country. It had big effect in the election. So what are these effects? That is what the research wants to uncover. So you'll be doing an explanatory research. And you see, all of us haven't missed, or all of us who have responded, and I take it to be what we call inductive reasoning. If I go by inductive reasoning, four of us who have responded on behalf of the class have relatively missed it. And so I want to assume that the entire class have missed understanding what these processes are about. Now you see why it is essential to understand your research topic, to understand what you are supposed to be doing, to understand what you'll be doing in the process of the research, to be able to tell what form of data to collect. Now that you have chosen experimental, you evaluating the relationship. We're not interested in whether it relates. Again, now that you have thought it is explorative, you want to ask questions that are not telling you the effects, but trying to uncover maybe historical development of the election, which is also a mishit. Now that you also thought it is evaluation, you might then think that you are trying to find whether it is effective, whether it is efficient, or whether it is not effective or not efficient. So you see, understanding of the process will tell or determine to a large extent what your forms would be, whether qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method. Again, three responses and we'll proceed. I know you'll be querying to want to raise observations or objections. So please, class rep, unmute them again. Let me see if we can get other responses. I'm making it an interactive class so that we would have as much understanding that we are
Okay.
supposed.
Okay, yes. I want to observe. But is it possible? Is it not possible to use more than one of these methods in carrying out an analysis? Because if you are saying this question is explanatory, but you need to discover the cause and effect first before you explain the extent of causes and the effect of those two variables, the social media and then the electoral outcome. Now, there are processes that you are supposed to undergo to be able to get the amount. How much is the effect of the social media on the electoral outcome before you can explain, before you can engage in explanation? So what I'm saying now is that, are you saying that the experiment and explanation, or exploratory and two methods cannot be used? The carrying out, because I discovered that most of the experimental method of conducting research, at the end of your experiment, when you discover the results, you can still proceed with explanation. So is it that in social research, two methods cannot be adopted in getting an answer to a particular, or reaching a conclusion in research? So that is my question. Your network has gone off. Oh, no network. Your mic has ceased. Let's wait for him to connect. He has, I think he has network issue now.
Okay, sorry for the interruption.
Okay, I should go ahead again?
Yeah, please proceed, sir. Sorry about that.
Okay, my question is this. Is it possible to employ more than one of these methods in carrying out a particular research work? Because, like your question here now, we have two different variables already, put in social media and then the electoral outcome. Now, the process of discovering how much effect is a social media having on electoral outcome, I think there is a process for you to discover that before you start explaining the extent of effect. So me, I'm saying that is there possibilities of employing more than one of these methods in a particular research operation?
Okay, straight up, I will respond to that before we take others. Thank you, Mr. Paul. And you see, you are getting closer to the point, and this is what I'm trying to build. What you are saying now is the possibility of mixed method research, and this is why I'm taking you guys gradually into this thing, so that when we get to this point, there will be adequate understanding. I said it is explanatory, you have said it is experimental, and I also said experimental is possible and can go, but that you would have to do other techniques to ensure that it effectively addresses the problem. So I will answer you straight up to say, yes, it is possible to adopt other methods, which takes us to mixed method research. So we'll get to that, and then we'll now explain. So you will explain the effect, and then you can measure the level of effect. And that is why I said, when you do this in hypothesis testing, we said there are two options of testing levels of relationship by the application of either contingency coefficient or the phi coefficient. We'll get to this point, but I'm glad that somebody is hitting the nail and somebody is working with me on the understanding I'm trying to create. So thank you, Mr. Paul. It is possible to adopt two methods.
It's okay. Thank you.
So can we have quickly?
Alaku raised hand before. Did you withdraw your hand?
I think let's take Omolara. She raised her hand too. That's a fresh person that raised her hand. Let's see if we can take that, if she's still on too.
Is it a physical hand? Because I'm not seeing her hand. So
she raised her hand initially, but
she later withdrew it. Okay. Omolara, go ahead. I've given you right. Unmute yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Very well.
Very clear.
Okay. The other time I wanted to talk, but I was not unmuted. What I'm thinking is that, like Mr. Paul is talking about the methods, I think what we're talking here now, these experimental, descriptive, explorative, I think they are not method per se. They are types of research. You know, when we get to method, I think that's when you talk about quantitative, qualitative, and mixed. So now I think you are talking about types of research. That topic you gave us now. You are asking whether is explanatory research or whether is explorative or whether is descriptive. You understand? Although when I wanted to raise up at that time, but I was not able to unmute myself. I wanted to say that it is explanatory, just as you have explained, because it's to explain what the effect of social media is on electoral outcome. Just to give an explanation, to analyze it, to explain it. What are the effects of social media on electoral outcome? But when we now come to method that we want to use in gathering data or in getting into this research, we cannot be talking about mixed method where we can now use both quantitative and qualitative.
Okay, Omolara, okay, like you talk about, you cannot explain what you don't know. And for you to know, you need to employ, like either you are saying font or type. Sometimes those words are interchangeably used mostly. Now, you cannot just go now start explaining as a science, because we are talking about science here. It's not a common science venture. So you cannot stand up now, begin to explain the effect of mass media on the electoral process without carrying out a research, a scientific investigation. And then which process, how can you conduct an investigation that is systematic? So you are talking about the type. And because of the two variables are involved, because an effect, you must discover that first. That is where experimenter come on board. It is through the experiment that you should be able to know the extent of effect of mass media on the electoral outcome. Then you can now begin to explain. So that is the position. That is what we are saying. It's not as if the argument is not on form or type, because we really know that sometimes the form or type can be used in neither of the type or the form, as in quantitative and qualitative. And I think where your observation is targeting is the mix that he's talking about. That mix is either qualitative, quantitative, or mix, mean adopting qualitative and quantitative. That is the mixed form that he's talking about. But this one type or form, anybody can mix the words.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Paul, and thank you, Mrs. Omolara. Let me stress something, that by typology and by method, you see, why I'm careful in using the word method to discuss those three forms is because when we begin to deal with them individually, you will find out that you have specific methods of research that are applicable to either of these three forms. When we begin to talk about survey, for instance, and we talk about FGD, focus group discussion, or we talk about content analysis, these are methods for collecting data. They are applicable to either of these three forms. Now, where you use, say, a questionnaire as an instrument, and you use focus group discussion, you have, or let's say you use a questionnaire and then you do, yes, focus group discussion. You have adopted a mixed method in that you have chosen to use first a method of questionnaire and again a method of focus group. That is where the methods come from. It is from the individualistic application of a data collection instrument or or process or format. But when Mr. Paul said, how can you explain what you don't know? It is a case of putting the horse before the cat or the cat before the horse. Remember, I took you back to your research parts, a part of your thesis. When I said the first part is introduction, the second part is social review, the third part is methodology, you will have an idea whether there is effect or not even before you begin to go to the field. So take note of that. The essence of literature review is to give you this idea. Literature review will guide you and provide a basic understanding of what you are going to engage in. You would have reviewed the works of different scholars that would have told you that social media affect electoral outcome. They do so in this way, in this way, in that way. But now we want to know the specifically 2015 election and 2019 election, what were the effects? So it means that you already know that it has, but you want to explain to the readers the exclusive effect it had on the 2019 general election. Now, the only time experimental research comes in is because our target is to see the level of effect. Level comes in because we want to know whether we can easily wish away social media from our electoral process and yet have the same outcome. Is the effect of social media so indebted or not? That is why we will now test hypothesis to have relationships. But we're going to be testing the level of the relationship. And that's why I mentioned to us the contingency and fight. We'll see this in my next semester where we'll begin to do statistics. We'll be talking about testing hypothesis and measuring the levels of relationship between variables. So we will explain, then we would experiment. I hope that is taken. Okay, so let's proceed. We have gotten some very useful interaction. And now we know exactly where we are. We know that it is essential for us to understand what our research entails while we proceed on carrying out the research. Now, the first form we're going to be discussing is qualitative research. What is qualitative research? How essential is qualitative research? Is it required in our contemporary times? Is it something that is obtainable in research processes currently? In carrying out a research, why should you use qualitative research rather than quantitative? Why should you use a quantitative rather than qualitative? We want to see all of these various requirements, and so that we will understand what is expected of us when we go about carrying out a research and applying a particular method or applying any of the forms. Now, first of all, qualitative research are those forms of research where a researcher collects qualitative data as a necessity for that research. in qualitative research type, a researcher collects data that are oftentimes textual. They are quality, they are not quantifiable. They are data that are concerned with the views of the respondents or the population of study. For instance, you want to find out what the effect of motivation on job performances is. In qualitative research, you will be less interested on the number of people that said motivation has effect on job performance, but you will be interested in the nature of the responses in discussing the effect of motivation on job performance. How does it happen? Yes, 20 people can say, yes, motivation affects job performance. But qualitative research want to get information on how. How does motivation affect job performance? In what way? What are the forms of motivation? Now, while carrying out qualitative research, it is also important that the researcher takes note of attitudinal or behavioral aspects of responses. Let's take, for instance, you are doing a research on leadership style and workers' performance. As soon as you ask a respondent a question concerning the level of output of workers in the organization relative to the form of leadership, in qualitative research, the researcher will look at the behavioral response before even the verbal response. Let's say a respondent who is working under an autocratic leader. As soon as the researcher asks, how comfortable are you working in this environment? Before the respondent will say, very comfortable, it will be a necessary factor for the researcher to look at the behavior of the individual. Before responding, did the respondent smile, or did the respondent drag their feet before saying yes? What is the way and manner in which they responded? When you work in an environment where leadership style is conducive for workers, and you ask such question, immediately the person might just smiling to say, very, very comfortable. I will not trade this organization for another. First, the response is very, very comfortable. And then second, the respondent has said they will not trade this organization for another, comes after there have been a gesture, maybe a smile, or maybe, ah, there will be a gesture that will precede a response. Probably when the researcher asks, does your manager possess a friendly atmosphere, or does he exude friendliness when he comes to the office? Just watch the respondent's facial connotation. In quantitative research, the researcher will not get this detail. The researcher in quantitative research will be getting the number of people that say we will, or we are convenient, we are comfortable working here, as against the number of people that say they are not convenient, or they're not comfortable. In quantitative research again, the researcher is interested in gathering data that are quantitative. The number of words as against the number of names and the number of years. Or again, when they are interested in numbers, quantity of data, we're not saying we're looking at whether the data is plenty or not. Please don't get me wrong. We're saying we want to see you have 200 respondents and you are evaluating a particular phenomenon, and you are having 189, for instance, saying yes to a response. This is giving you a particular data to say majority of respondents opted for the yes view, probably because this and that and that. So the emphasis is on how many of them said this. That is for quantitative research. Now, the researcher will not be interested in looking at the fact that these people said yes, maybe because they do not trust where these responses will be going to. They do not trust whether their manager will see the result. They might say yes because they think that the manager might have something to do with this result of this research. And so they might be scared of their job. But you see, a qualitative research will get the natural conception from their prosemics, from their facial or gestures that they will exhibit before even the response that they will get. So while you engage in a qualitative research, it is why it is essential for you to know what is it I want to get. Will tell you what form or method, as Mrs. Omalara was taking our mind to, the method that will be applicable in collecting a particular data. You see, now, if you use take for instance, you use observation method. And while you are observing the respondents, and probably you are doing a non-participant observation, which is very risky, not often applied in the social sciences because of the ethics of research. But let's assume you are doing a non-participant observation and you are able to gather all of the gestures. That data will not be complete because you have not given the respondents the chance to state the reasons for whatever situation or whatever had influenced that form of gesture. This is where mixed method research comes in. So while you have observed, you will now bring another quantitative form of research known as survey, for instance. Now, in survey, you will now take up your questionnaire. In the questionnaire, you have both closed and open-ended questions. You will be analyzing why they have made a particular gesture by asking them an open-ended question.
Now your
Sorry
network,
again.
the network
Yeah,
back. Okay.
very well. Sorry for that breakup. So please let me get the response. I was discussing the forms now.
Okay. The first person on the list is Alaku. Alaku, unmute yourself to ask. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
I think I enjoy the class in the sense that we are trying to apply what we are learning to a particular purpose, a particular research topic. I think it's make us to understand it more. But what I want to clear up is what Mrs. Somalara said the other time about type, method, and purpose. I think I'm not too clear. I don't know if you can just brief us a brief analysis of it, that type of research, method, and purpose of research. Thank you, sir.
Types, method, and purpose.
Yes, sir.
Did I get you right? All right.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll address that. So, any other person?
Alapa, what of your hands? Is your hand paining you? You have dropped your hand? Yes? Unmute yourself.
No, you can go on, sir.
What
I was not
happened?
hearing you. There was no
What?
voice then. That was why I raised my hand.
That's why you raise your hand.
Yes, I wanted to complain about the non-vocal.
Okay, I thought you want to use your hand to restore the voice. Okay. Any other person?
All right. So, apart from Salah, who wants a clarification, every other person is saying we have understood what we have done so far. and your understanding even more when we talk about qualitative research. So on that basis, our address allows area of confusion. Again, I said types of research is a usage that can be peculiar to a teacher, a lecturer, a writer, a text, or whatever. You can begin to see different types of research, and you see quantitative, you see qualitative, you see case method, you see historical, archival, whatsoever. But my emphasis here tonight is for you to have an understanding of what research in itself entails. And that is why I have not used the word type, I have used the word forms, which can be interchanged for types. And I have said three major forms I want to be dealing with: qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method. But when I discussed experimental, evaluative, explanatory, and whatsoever, I also didn't call them types. I said every research process entails a characteristic. It entails a demand. There is what is required of a researcher while that person is engaged in knowledge development. Now, what is required of a researcher, I said, is dependent on the phenomenon of study. So when your phenomenon has been clearly picked, it will determine whether that researcher will be evaluating, or whether the researcher will be describing, or whether the researcher will be evaluating or experimenting. So those ones are just what I will call the 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 demand of a research process relative to subject of study. I hope you understand that now. What you are expected to do, in that when your phenomenon is an explanatory phenomenon and you are describing, you will not be, at the end of the day, you won't be developing any form of knowledge. Somebody asks, what is this one doing? In these forms, in those things we have listed, we are trying to discuss the action capacity of a researcher, the exquisite activity that the researcher is doing. Purpose, yes, is objective. And of course, objective results from peculiar problems. And so your purpose can define whether, or will define the actions that you'll be carrying, that you'll be exhibiting. It's just like when you say you are a student, a postgraduate student. What is expected of you as a student? That is why Dr. Oscar will say, if you don't make 75% of his attendance, don't bother writing exams. Because it is expected of you as a student to be in class. And you will not call that thing type of student, isn't it? That's action definitive. It is the same thing about the researcher who is studying criminal behaviors. Or I don't know if we are aware of what we call prisonization of offenders. Criminology students might have an idea. When somebody gets into a prison and become even more criminal minded, a researcher wants to understand why these things happen. And then the researcher goes there and is telling us Nigerian prison system has only 4 prison cells. It has 2 light bulbs. It has 4 prison warders. You are doing descriptive. That is what you are doing. Action definitive. One of us, you should be telling us that there are no programs of rehabilitation. There are no effective programs of rehabilitation. That is why people come out from prison becoming more sophisticated criminals. People spend years in prison, sometimes for crimes they do not commit. You expect them to come out of the prison after 25 years, smiling at you and telling you, well done for incarcerating me for 25 years for something I know nothing about. That person will seek vengeance. There is what we call the self concept or containment theory in criminology. That kind of person has built a different self concept and containment. There are 2 factors that influences individuals' self concept and containment. There are innate and external factors. The external factors within the environment of the prison would influence this person to develop such kind of behavior that will be detrimental to society when the person is released. So these are the things we'll be discussing rather than telling us it has 4 walls, it has 1 bulb, it has this and that. Describing, you have missed your action line. So purpose will define action. I want to believe Mr. Salau has got that right now. That's right. That's right. So back to qualitative research. I said the forms of data that is gotten during qualitative research are qualitative data. Oftentimes, these data are textual in nature. And in other hand, these data provide usefulness of understanding in terms of attitude and behavior. Qualitative research in this regard helps us define the contradictions that exist between somebody's response and their action. Somebody is saying yes, but the gesture, the facial response is sad. The way the researcher will report that result would tell a lot about what the person has seen and what the person has heard. There's a difference between seeing and hearing. You might be seeing A, but the person is saying C, or the person is saying B. So a skilled researcher will be able to put these things together. This is what qualitative research is about. And the forms or the methods of research carried out under this particular form of research are observation methods, focus group discussion. Case